There was a disturbing attack the other night on a donut shop in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In recent days, this donut shop had hosted events featuring drag queens. Some people didn't like that. But on Monday, after it had closed for the night, video surveillance showed a man getting out of his car, bashing in windows with a bat, and then throwing a Molotov cocktail inside, which obviously is super threatening to LGBTQ people in Tulsa. But across the country, activists say they're increasingly not just being targeted by individuals, but even by state and local governments.
We will make sure that parents can send their kids to school to get an education, not an indoctrination.
Well, later today in Florida, the state's medical board there could make it illegal for a transgender person under the age of 18 to get the medical care doctors say they need. ABC's Chiara Alfonseca has been tracking this. And Chiara, I think I had noticed groups of activists taking issue with transgender youngsters. I did not know a state medical board could get involved in something like this. What's happening here?
Yeah, so Florida and specifically Governor Ron DeSantis are kind of leading the charge in implementing anti-LGBTQ policies and legislation. And so we saw that when they restricted LGBTQ content in some classrooms, when they banned the use of Medicaid to pay for gender-affirming treatments for trans people of all ages. And so this is just the latest in that effort.
The motion carries. Thank you so much. And the meeting shall adjourn.
The state's Agency for Healthcare Administration had changed its recommendations to say that there's not enough evidence that gender-affirming care is safe and effective, which actually goes against the general consensus among many accredited medical institutions.
The widely accepted view of the professional medical community is that gender-affirming care is the appropriate treatment for gender dysphoria, and that, for some adolescents, gender-affirming medical interventions are necessary.
And so later today, the Florida Board of Medicine might pass this rule, which will effectively ban medical or surgical gender-affirming care for trans youth. And it could have a major impact on this small and vulnerable community that we see already faces a lot of discrimination in the country.
When we say gender-affirming care, what does that mean? And what does that mean when we talk about somebody under the age of 18? Like what sort of procedures or medications are on the table here?
So this ban would affect hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and also physical gender confirmation surgeries. Unless someone is enrolled in a clinical research trial that's held up to certain standards, but there are none going on in the state of Florida right now.
Gender-affirming care does not equal surgery.
I understand. There's a continuum.
So social transitioning, counseling on gender dysphoria, that will not be affected under this rule.
And how would that impact young people and their families? Like, what are we hearing from them?
So last week in a hearing in the drafting of this rule, we heard from many different families who call gender-affirming care life-saving for people who received it. And so whether that was themselves or their child.
What you're talking about is waiting until age 18. Well, they won't be here. This group commits suicide. They will not be here.
There were lots of stories about how gender-affirming care, even if it's a social transition, which means, just changing pronouns or changing the way that you dress, how much that positively impacted their well-being, their self-confidence.
We're not looking to have surgery. We're not looking to do anything harmful to our daughter other than support her mental health. It would be psychologically damaging if she had to go through puberty as a male.
And just their life overall and their connections with their families, especially since, some families talked about even struggling to give them that gender-affirming treatment, whether it's, social or medical. Trans youth are much more likely to experience mental health conditions, suicidal ideations, and that can affect them in many ways going into adulthood, when facing discrimination or when just not being able to fully present or fully express themselves as they are.
Are there medical risks? I mean, are there actually medical downsides to having any of these therapies, though? I get that on the whole, they're considered a good thing for these children, but is there a case to say, no, not so much?
So as for puberty blockers, I know that there's a lot of misinformation about puberty blockers.
Consequences to a child making permanent life-altering decisions, taking drugs that alter their moods and bodies, and then having their genitals and breasts mutilated is beyond comprehension.
But according to physicians that I've spoken to, these potential side effects, such as, infertility or other health risks, are not a risk to use taking puberty blockers. And, the process of taking hormone therapy, doing puberty blockers, going through, physical gender confirmation surgeries. Every physician I spoke to that works with youth going through this, it's a very long, lengthy, really serious conversation that is had with youth and their parents.
We saw endocrinologists, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. I was presented with options and made difficult decisions. Today, my son has a new name that matches his gender.
That's one of the things they really wanted to make clear was that, these aren't willy-nilly decisions. These are people who really invest in learning about the medical side of things and take this change really seriously, is what they've said.
I was 50 years old when I transitioned, and it took me to 62 to figure it out. So if me at 62 can't figure out how in God's green earth is a minor going to? They want to be a fireman one day, a policeman, a boy or girl.
There are people who have spoken out about their transitioning process and the process of detransitioning, where they talked about going through gender affirming care and then later reversing course.
I started T 7 months after coming out at the age of 16, and I really thought transitioning was going to fix everything. At first, I was elated, but my mental health did not improve. I became more suicidal, more unstable, and the anxiety became debilitating.
They talk about their mental and physical complications that they experienced as a result of gender affirming care that they say they might have gotten too early or with not much thought is what they, talk about. After the Florida Medical Board votes, and if this goes through, there will still be a lot of public hearings and a lot of opportunities for testimony. So I expect this to not be over after today and to keep seeing the debate continue.
Yeah, and a key point in all of this is that there are 14 members on this board. Not only were all of them appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis, but according to the Tampa Bay Times, 8 of those 14 have donated to the DeSantis campaign or his political committee. It's becoming very clear which way he thinks this vote should go. So we'll hear more about this later. Kiara Alfonseca, thank you.
Thanks so much.